Welcome back to the Oxendine Law Podcast. I'm your host, Jarrod Oxendine, and I've got my trusted advisor, partner, and compadre co-host here, Christine Palmer, as usual.
Yeah.
So let's dive in. Today, we're going to talk about co-parenting. We're going to give you tips on how to best co-parent concerning your children. Divorce doesn't mean the end of parenting. It just means redefining it. So today, we're focusing on co-parenting, how to create a healthy environment for your kids, even after your separation. Whether you're just struggling to maintain or find that balance, this will give you the tips that you need, practical tips to make co-parenting work. So, Christine, first thing I would say is when you get divorced, everybody has a parenting plan. That's our term that we now
Required
have.
by law, the permanent parenting plan.
The PPP is permanent parenting plan. And for those of you that don't know what a permanent parenting plan is, that is an order from the court, signed by the judge, and it lists out everything mom's supposed to be doing concerning the kids and everything dad's supposed to be doing concerning the kids. Who has final decision-making authority, parenting time schedules, dividing the holidays, who's going to do transportation, who can have telephone communication with the children and when they're with the other parent. All the things that go
Who
into
holds the passports? How often do you have to give notice of a move? Is there an out-of-state provision that you have to let them know in advance if you're going out of state? Morality clauses can be in there. So it's a hugely important document. And
the
it is thorough.
morality clause, to tell people what a morality clause is, because some people might not know what that is, because that's something that comes up all the time. Morality clause is when you have in your order, it says you can't have boyfriends or girlfriends spend the night either for a certain period of time after you're divorced or unless you're married, for example. Some people have those, some people don't.
Yeah, and they're unique. Each one is usually catered specifically to a family or a situation. So sometimes it's no introduction of a romantic partner or significant other. Sometimes it's a mandatory need to be dating them for a certain amount of time before they're introduced to the kids. Sometimes it's simply the other partner or former spouse gets the opportunity to meet your new partner prior to introducing the kids. So it's just a little bit of a level of protection. It really, I think parents misinterpret it as somehow a punishment against them, when truly it's just a protection for the kids. We don't need these kids who've just survived a divorce suddenly thinking they have a new mommy or daddy or getting confused by that. Sometimes they like the person and get attached, but then sometimes they just resent and hate the person because they're still not over the situation for the divorce. So while a lot of parents think that, well, he just wants that in there because he doesn't want me to see anybody else. Well, no, maybe he just really does want to protect the children from being introduced to people so quickly.
So here's tip number one. Tip number one is be reasonable and treat your permanent parenting plan like a living, breathing document. What do I mean by that? Don't look at just what the four corners of the document says, and if it's not in there, tell your ex that they can't do it.
Sorry, that's not in the order.
You can't have any more, any less than what's in the order. If it's not in the order, then we're not doing it.
Right.
Okay, why do you not want to take that approach? Number one, you're both going to be miserable. Completely miserable.
Yeah, because you're both going to need concessions from time to time.
It goes both ways. It goes both ways. If your ex reaches out to you and says, hey, I know it's your weekend, but I got this great opportunity to take the kids on a free trip. My company's paying for it. It's all inclusive. We're staying in this awesome hotel and resort. Will you switch weekends with me? Why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
Why not? Because guess what? You're going to probably have something come up sometime where you're going to want to switch a weekend. And if you say no to your ex, they're going to say no to you. And you're both going to be miserable.
Right.
And the kids are going to be miserable. I tell people all the time, and this is bleeding over to a different tip, so I'll say this and we'll come back to it in a second. Life is so much easier and everybody's so much happier if you just get along for the sake of the kids. Yeah. If you have kids after the divorce, right? And the example I always like to give people is when little Johnny graduates from high school and he's there taking his high school graduation picture. How many times have you seen mom wants to go have a separate picture with Johnny and then dad goes to have a separate picture with Johnny? Hell is going to freeze over before mom and dad do a joint picture with Johnny. So then Johnny goes to his dorm and either doesn't put up any of the pictures.
Most likely.
Or he's got one picture of his graduation with his dad and one picture of his graduation with his mom. All Johnny wants is just have one picture with both of you in it. Doesn't matter if you're still married or not, right?
Right.
So we'll come back to that tip in a second. But this parenting plan, things change, circumstances change, life happens. The schedule that you agreed to 2 years ago might not be what works for your schedule now.
Right.
You may need the other parent to help you out from time to time in getting the children somewhere during your parenting time and vice versa. So treat your permanent parenting plan, again, tip number 1, as a living, breathing document and make concessions where you can.
Right. And I think another sort of common issue that we see is, I'm talking for a single instance, not like for eternity. For some reason, you think you can't split up the kids. There's literally nothing wrong with mom taking daughter to practice and dad taking son to practice, no matter whose time it is. It's not like if you're switching, okay, well, I can switch weekends, but you'll have to have them both this weekend. If there's multiple kids, divide and conquer. I have recently done 2 parenting plans where one night per week, one parent has one child and the other parent has the other child, and they switch every week. When you were married, they didn't have that much one-on-one time. So what a luxury when you're creating these new families, because we say, Oxendine Law, we're improving families. So we took your former not so good family, we've divided it into 2 families, and we're supposed to be improving. We're supposed to be making each of these new families better than that former family unit was. So take advantage of that. Enjoy some one-on-one time with kids that you maybe didn't ever get to have before.
That's great advice. All right. Ready for tip number 2?
Yes.
Tip number 2, communication doesn't stop when you get divorced. Frankly, if anything, if you have kids together, communication actually might need to get better after you get divorced because you're not living together anymore. So what do I mean by that? If you have kids, there's always something that comes up regarding children. Their extracurricular activity schedule, something that's going on medically, something that's going on with school, right?
Night at
a
the school.
test, yes, or a curriculum night or whatever it may be. And you will see parents not communicate about any of that stuff. And they just said, you know what, they can find out on their own, right? Or even worse, they'll go out and make a decision on a major matter, such as what type of medical procedure to get, what school to enroll the children in, oh my gosh, which is one of the worst things you can do, what sport or extracurricular activity to enroll the child in, and they won't even communicate what they're thinking about putting the child in with the other parent in advance. I don't know why anybody thinks that that's a good idea. Why? What's going to happen? You don't communicate those things. You just go out and do it. You're just asking for an argument.
You are.
The other side is going to get mad. They're going to get upset. They're going to send you nasty emails, nasty texts. They're going to blow up your phone. Y'all are going to end up in an argument. And meanwhile, who suffers?
Just the children. I mean, that's
children.
it. Every time.
Mainly the children, the parents too, because they're miserable, right? So communicating about all those things that they come up is a wonderful thing. There's an app. I resist apps. I'm not really technology savvy. I'm starting to slowly become more accustomed to using apps. I have more apps on my phone now than I ever have, and I hate them. You look down at your phone, it's all these squares everywhere. But there's a good app, right, that everybody's starting to use these days called Our Family Wizard, and we would recommend that. It is an app where y'all can communicate through the app, and you can put everything concerning your children in the app. Their school schedule, their sports games, their practices, parent-teacher conferences, upcoming medical appointments. And that way, all y'all have to do is just go to the app and everybody's got access to the same information and you can communicate through the app.
Right.
And that way, there's actually a record of everything that you've communicated about.
Yeah, apps. There are a few free versions as well. Our Family Wizard has a small subscription fee. In my opinion, it's totally worth it because it is by far the most superior when it comes to actual interface and usage. It has the message function. You can do video calls and phone calls on the app, and those are, I say recorded. The content is not recorded, but the fact that it occurred. So if you've got someone accusing you of not allowing contact, the fact that that call occurred is recorded. You can share receipts on there. So for the parents that equally divide or pro rata share divide uninsured medical expenses, extracurricular activity expenses, it's all condensed in one place. So they can't say, oh, I didn't see that receipt, or I didn't get that, or you didn't tell me that. So it's a protection for you. And it's also a convenience tool for you.
That's right. And the only other thing I'd add to communication is communicate, but let's have healthy communication.
Yes.
Right? I mean, don't be nasty.
Our Family Wizard actually has a tone meter that you can turn on that will assist you in those moments that we've all had where you write out the text and you hit send and then you think, probably should not have done that. So please Draft, read, reread before you send. But that tone meter, as silly as it may sound, a lot of my clients have said, I really like having that because it does make me think twice in my little hot-headed moments about what I'm sending over.
Yeah, because it's very easy if you disagree with something and you got your ex there to belittle them
Right.
or criticize a decision they made when they had the child or interrogate them about what they did during their parenting time. You don't need to be doing that.
Right.
Absent some major thing that's happened,
Yeah.
just keep friendly, effective communication and make sure you're communicating frankly, the only thing you should be talking about is your kids.
That's it. And communicate freely. How many times do you hear, and I'm going to make the stereotype, it usually is the mom, I'm not his secretary. I don't have to tell him that. Listen, the more you communicate, number one, the easier it becomes. But number two, the easier it is on you because that number one, that's going to backfire on you if you don't tell them sometimes. But also if you have over communicated or overly communicated, they can never say, you didn't tell me. And if you put everything in there and they're not showing up, sometimes, that makes them look bad because you're telling them about everything that exists, every little appointment, every little event, every little practice, even if it's just, hey, we're going to pick up jerseys. That's not really an event. Some parents, I'm not going to tell him that. That's not an event. That's not an activity. I'm not required. But if you're telling him or her all that and they don't come and they don't come and they don't come and they don't come, that ends up making you look like the super reasonable parent and they look like the bad guy. So you're really only protecting yourself if you overly freely communicate.
Exactly right. All right. Tip number 3, recognize that mom's household may be different from dad's household and dad's household may be different from mom's household. And that's okay.
That's actually good. We make well-rounded children when we don't have robotic, identical houses where everything is exactly the same. Children need that sort of, we put kids in daycare and send them to school, yes, for an education, but also that social aspect. So the same thing in the households, right? Having different structures, different opportunities, different environments breeds healthy children.
It does. And I can't tell you, and I know you see it just like I do, how many people just insist that the other household has to be the same routine. It's got to be the same rules.
Same. This, same. Bath, the same. Yeah.
Life doesn't work that way.
Well,
and it doesn't need to work that way. It actually works better if you let dad run his parenting time and household the way he's going to run it. And mom, you run your household and parenting time the way you want to run it.
Right.
Because the kids benefit from both.
Sure. Absolutely.
Different does not mean worse.
Right.
Doesn't mean bad.
Right.
It's just different. It's a different, acceptable way of doing things. Now, we're not talking about a situation where you got somebody that's got a problem, okay?
Yeah.
All right, if your ex has got an alcohol problem or drug problem, we're obviously not saying deal with it. That's not what we're saying. We're saying if somebody's doing something that's different the way you do things, it doesn't automatically mean that it's bad or it's wrong.
Right.
Or it's worse than the way you're doing things. So accept those differences, embrace those differences, and everybody will be better off.
Right. Or different than the way we did it when we were married. Because you've usually got one parent that's pretty rigid. They're going to run that household the same as when it was a 2-parent household because they're the program person, they're the schedule person, they're the one. And then the other one's kind of figured it out as they go. Oftentimes, that doesn't mean it's bad. So yeah, just because that's not what we did when we were married, of course it's not, because we're not married anymore. So the situation is different. And I encourage those rigid, scheduled, rule-following parents to use that opportunity to adjust your own. Just because you've always done it doesn't make it right. So use that new opportunity to maybe reassess what you're doing in your household, maybe even figure out what the kids like about dad's house or mom's house, incorporate some of that at home so the kids are more comfortable with a little bit of consistency without being identical.
That's it. And so last tip that I can think of right now, we all know disagreements are going to come up, right? I mean, it happens. It happens even when you're married, right? Certainly can happen after you get divorced. So I think tip number 4 would be handle your disagreements and your conflicts effectively.
Yeah.
That's tip number 4. Know how to handle your conflicts and your disagreements effectively. And there are ways to do that. When a disagreement or a conflict comes up, my tip would be, number 1, make sure you have an amicable, level-headed discussion with your ex away from the kids.
Right.
Can't tell you how many times people just want to argue and yell.
Exchange.
Yes, at the parenting time exchange. What a genius thing to do. You know?
Right.
Number 1, you're just being a jerk, right? Because you're not going to get anything from
you
that kind of
ambush
communication.
that other parent, you're not going to get,
Your kid's there. maybe crying, certainly upset, uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and you just yelled or screamed or chastised the ex, they're not going to sit there and have a rational, problem-solving oriented conversation with you. You're just being a jerk and you're trying to show off and you're trying to basically make the other person feel bad is all you're doing.
Yeah.
It's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
There's a way to have a communication that will actually help solve your disagreement.
Sure. And you know your former spouse. So number one, you know what those triggers are. So let's avoid them, right? And then number two, you also know your spouse well enough to know that some people do better with maybe not face to face. If you've got somebody on the other side that's a notorious hothead, maybe send it as an email and say, I would like to discuss this in writing to avoid emotional confrontation.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's not saying that you're not giving it that amicable good faith. You're doing what's best for the situation. So I know plenty of people who really just can't kind of keep it together in person. So just go to the form of communication that's going to be most effective. And then vice versa. If you are the kind of the parent who wants to hide behind the email and you're not really like bold enough to have the conversation, get bold enough, right? Like get over yourself for the sake of your kids and go have that in-person one-on-one. But you know there's going to be the type of people that don't do well with in-person. So it's going to be best if you can have that in person. Do it in public, maybe at a Starbucks, so everybody is in check and nobody gets too loud or whatever.
But don't do the in-person around the kids.
Never.
Don't do it like at the football game
No.
or at the schoolhouse, you know,
So
or in front of or in
should
front
never
of
be a
in front of
spontaneous.
your family members or groups of friends, right? I mean, like you suggested, maybe you suggest, buying that person a cup of coffee at the coffee shop, or let's just make it simple. Call them when they don't have the children and you don't have them. Just pick up the phone and say, hey, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about that I think it'd be important if we get on the same page, and have that level of tone. Right? Handle your conflicts effectively outside the presence of your children.
And when possible, remember that you can properly utilize third parties. Most formerly married couples have some person, be it a family member, a friend, a church member, a neighbor, that you actually both still trust. And don't ambush that person either, but ask them, hey, sometimes we get out of hand. Would you mind sitting down with us? It doesn't have to be. Of course, we have plenty of paid resources. We have co-parent counselors. We have co-parent coordinators. We have therapists that can help you work through this. A lot of resources come from churches and other community organizations. So those are out there. If it's reaching that level where you do need sort of expert or loose expert assistance. But remember, just a trusted friend or family member could also be that sort of neutral that brings the neutral energy to the conversation and helps you both out. They don't have to pick sides and be a tiebreaker. They can just facilitate the conversation between the two of you, maybe give a little neutral input and get y'all to the right place.
Those are our tips. We appreciate y'all listening, and trust us when I say this. There are lots of families that we have helped, and they've implemented these tips post-divorce, and they actually get along better post-divorce than they did when they were married, when they have children, if they implement these types of tips and strategies. You're going to be happier. Your ex is going to be happier. Your kids are certainly going to be happier. So implement these tips, and you will actually be so happy you did. Trust me. Give it a chance. Give it a try. I know there's some of you out there that are pushing back. You just can't stand that person. Give it a try. You'll feel better. I promise you will. Thanks for checking us out. Go to your any major social media platform. Whatever your favorite one is, we're there. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. We'll see you next time.